challenges that you might see with this population. Having poor verbal skills or no verbal skills, you might see that those that do have nice verbal skills, you might see that they also may have difficulty, though, with understanding facial expressions, really not reading between the lines in that way. When you do hear language, sometimes it can be a little bit interesting because the language may seem very extensive, but yet the understanding, the receptive language may not be well at all. On the other hand, the person might not have very good expressive language, but actually understand a great deal of what's going on. And sometimes with this population, you do find that language is oftentimes mainly used for functional needs, getting my needs, wants, and desires across rather than a social interaction. And there are many other things, but kind of focusing in there kind of leads us on to think about, well, then how do you make some determination about sort of communication targets? And this is going to have to be incredibly individualized because it is a priority across the board, but it will not look the same for everyone, obviously. So you do need to think about the use abilities both expressively and receptively, both ways. You need to think about the situation, the environment, of course, the intent of that communication process, that interaction. And then when we're talking about behavioral challenges, we should always consider that communication will be part of the issue and part of the strategies that you want to consider. It may not rise as the exact function of the behavior, but it will always be something that we need to bring into play. So in a way that is so broad, there is no way in 10 to 12 minutes, as Bobby said, that we're going to really hit hard on this. But what we can do is talk about an intervention model, a framework that we have used at Ocali and in many places across the state. And it really does help build a framework for being able to input interventions. It was developed by Dr. Ruth Aspey and Dr. Barry Grossman, and it's not a program, but it provides a way of organizing and prioritizing your supports. So it's a ziggurat is what you see in front of you. It's not a pyramid, but it's basically built on tiers, and the tiers have to have an incredibly strong base to support all of the other pieces that you're going to layer on top of it. And so it does allow for individualization, at which we are definitely looking at when it comes to this population. So let me show you the intervention ziggurat a little bit. So here the base is the sensory biological area, which does include trauma. So we do need to address, understand, assess sensory biological needs and include that ever so important trauma piece. Right off the bat, base can't really move from there unless we have that. Then we talk about reinforcement, and that could include just thinking about motivation. How would the person be motivated? And I know this doesn't exactly align this particular model with what we're going to talk about today, but when I reviewed it, I felt like that, and I've got a head shake in the room, thank you, that this could fit nicely in with what we're going to hear in the next few minutes. So reinforcement motivation. Then with this population, oftentimes we have to think about the structure of the environment, and visual tactile supports are definitely evidence-based practices we want to consider. Task demands falls, or as you build up, is the next area, and you're really looking at removing obstacles to any kind of task, activity, anything the person wants to be involved in, because those obstacles, those task demands could be something not related to the task itself, but to the environment, to the communication, to the social experience. And then finally, we start looking at, okay, what does the person need to learn? But until we really build those levels, we can't just jump right into saying, well, you need to learn to do this and not do that. And so I didn't click as I should have, sorry guys. And so those are the levels, and we'll move on to your question. Well, what does this have to do with communication, Chris? Because I didn't see a communication level. Well, that's because if you look at the next slide, communication supports, when you crack open the ziggurat, are considered at each level. It is an ongoing it is so important that we can't just think about any particular level without asking ourselves the questions about communication supports. And so these are the kinds of questions that you may have to ask yourself as you're building a ZIGGURAT support plan. How does a person effectively communicate their needs and preferences? And when it comes to trauma, how are they able to communicate, understand those experiences that they may have had? How do they understand and communicate options and preferences related to reinforcement or motivation? Visual tactile supports and structure is an amazing opportunity, as it says here, to support expressive and receptive language. The way that we communicate to others could require a great deal of modification or even simple modification in order for them to both understand and express. So communication itself can become a task demand. And then finally, when we are at that level of skills to teach, we should always, always, always think about what is the kind of communication a person needs to learn. It can be, and it usually is a priority with this population, and that does include social communication. Not just being able to get needs and wants, desires, but social communication. So very briefly, I'm going to tell you what, again, top 4 strategies. I am not a speech language pathologist, so this is just very simple strategies that I think any of us could use and take tomorrow. The first one has to do with, looking at our own verbal language and our own conversations when we have environments where there is extensive multiple conversations happening. This can be incredibly overwhelming to individuals in the environment, and it doesn't support them initiating or entering into a communication. My second strategy is less is more. And we see this on, is that people really pile on one direction, piece of information, question, comment, without ever giving that time to process. We want to think about the language we're using, concrete versus abstract, the words that we're really offering information with, really more what to do kinds of words versus question. Questions puts people in a high demand situation. And then that old visual support comes in there. So this is just a quick example. John, would be too much generally. John, it would be really nice if you wouldn't mind helping Chase and me get ready for dinner by setting the dining room table tonight. Can hardly say that in one breath. But if you looked at scaffolding it, you could say things like, John, please set the table for dinner. Please set the table. Will you set the table? And then if you were going to ask that question, be prepared for that no response and honor it because you did ask. Mm-hmm. John, set table. And then you could just use the visual of forks, spoons, etc. Which this seems very simplistic, but you would be surprised how often this can become a problem. We forget in the heat of the moment these very simple strategies. My third one is wait time, which we just sort of alluded to. People really require oftentimes additional time to process. This we know it is a neurological disorder, and we do know that people oftentimes will require this, and it needs to be done allowing people that time to process without new information. Up to 10 seconds is not unusual. So I'm going to take 10 seconds to just show you how long 10 seconds can be. Okay, that's 10 very uncomfortable seconds that people we do not have time in this day and age to wait. And so we don't. But you will see that using a protocol, which is on the next slide, and this is just one that we use, but you can definitely sort of create your own. It's just about developing a way that you give a direction, give that 10 seconds wait time. Don't add anything else to it. Repeat it if you need to. You don't need to say it differently, just repeat it. And then if the person doesn't seem to respond or understand, add gestures, pictures, cues, and wait again. So wait time is a really powerful strategy, and it doesn't cost a thing. You just have to put it into your personal practice. And then visual supports, not going to go through a whole bunch of visual supports because we really don't have time, but I could not leave this without throwing this in here, because when you think about it, language unfolds over time, so that communicating partner, the person that is receiving that information, needs to pay close attention, can't move away from it, and in real time, you can't go back. Once it leaves the mouth, it's gone. So visual supports really offers that opportunity for the person to think about, understand, revisit the information. And so it can be anything under the sun. You just have to, again, individualize it to the person and what they understand. So visual supports for individuals with autism, developmental disorders is a very strong evidence-based practice. And so I really encourage people to think about how you include visual supports into your if you're thinking ziggurat, your level of the ziggurat all the way up and down, but just in general, across the board, communicating with individuals with disabilities. What can I add? Because you see that last bullet down there, how many of those things are just what we use anyway? Schedules, checklist, phone, calendars. If we didn't have those, we'd be in trouble. So that is the didactic this morning. It is very quick, brief, and it's really not complicated. I hope you check out the Ziggurat. I think it's a very user-friendly model for thinking about how to scaffold and how to put that really strong base down for the individual.